pull those guys out, and so it was not the energetic start certainly that we had to the first game. And we forced some passes, too many turnovers again. We're still growing and figuring out when we should throw it to the post and when we should go another way.
This wasn't a routine update. It wasn't a quiet adjustment behind the scenes. This was a line drawn in permanent marker, and once it was drawn, there was no erasing it. Team USA made a decision so cold, so calculated, that names once considered untouchable were removed without hesitation. No warning, no farewell, just silence. And buried inside that silence was a message that sent shockwaves through women's basketball. Legacy no longer guarantees a seat at the table. Late at night, phones started lighting up. Whispers turned into leaks, then confirmation followed. Multiple veterans, players who carried gold, pressure, and expectations for years, were suddenly out. Fans assumed it had to be personal, disrespectful, even reckless, but that assumption misses the point completely. This wasn't emotional, this was strategic, and the scariest part, it was deliberate. Because while everyone was focused on who was removed, they missed the bigger shift. One player didn't just make the roster, she altered the entire power structure behind it. Caitlin Clark didn't walk into Team USA as another star. She walked in as a sign that the old system had expired. And what happened next behind closed doors explains everything about where this program and the global game is headed. What made this decision hit so hard wasn't just the names involved, it was how it happened. Team USA didn't ease anyone out. There was no press tour, no framed tributes, no thank you for everything speeches. Players who had defined eras of dominance were removed in the same way fringe prospects usually are, quietly, efficiently. That alone sent a chilling signal across the WNBA. If this can happen to them, it can happen to anyone. For years, the program operated with an unspoken rule. Once you proved yourself on the world stage, your place was safe. Olympic medals weren't just accolades, they were insurance. But that protection disappeared overnight. The cuts weren't announced as demotions or temporary adjustments, they were final. And the finality is what shook players, coaches, and fans alike. It forced everyone to confront a reality the sport had tiptoed around for too long. Past success is no longer a guaranteed currency. The shock rippled far beyond the players directly affected. Agents started recalculating careers. Veterans across the league quietly reassessed their timelines. Younger players suddenly realized the door hadn't just cracked open, it had been blown off its hinges. Team USA wasn't just trimming a roster, they were rewriting the rules of survival inside the most prestigious program in women's basketball. And here's what made it even more unsettling. This wasn't framed as a controversy from the inside. There were no emotional leaks, no public resistance, no internal chaos spilling out. That calm suggested something far more serious. These decisions weren't rushed, they were planned, debated, approved. Which means this wasn't about individual decline, it was about a complete shift in how value is measured. That's why the WNBA community felt blindsided. This wasn't one move, it was a warning, a statement that reputation, years of service, even hero status could be overridden if the fit no longer matched the future. And once that idea took hold, the question everyone started asking wasn't who got cut, it was who's next. For decades, Team USA walked into international tournaments with an invisible advantage before the ball was even tipped. The names alone were enough. Opponents respected the talent, feared the depth, and often played tight before the first whistle. That edge masked flaws, it covered inefficiencies, and for a long time it worked. But somewhere along the way, the rest of the world stopped waiting for permission to catch up. International programs didn't just improve, they adapted faster. They studied tendencies, they stripped away isolation-heavy offenses and replaced them with constant motion. Guards became shooters, forwards became floor spacers, bigs learned how to defend in space instead of camping in the paint. The game sped up, and decisions had to be made in fractions of seconds.
Meanwhile, reputation stopped meaning anything the moment the scouting report hit the floor. Recent tournaments made that reality impossible to ignore. Games that used to feel like formalities turned uncomfortable. Defensive rotations had to be perfect, communication couldn't slip, missed assignments were punished immediately with threes, backdoor cuts, or transition runs. Countries that once hoped to keep games close were now building systems specifically designed to exploit hesitation. What changed most wasn't talent, it was fear, or rather, the absence of it. International teams stopped reacting to Team USA and started attacking them. They hunted mismatches instead of avoiding them. They forced switches. They spread the floor and dared slower lineups to survive possessions in space. Every weakness was tested, repeatedly, without mercy. That's when the illusion finally cracked. The gap that once allowed Team USA to dominate with familiarity and experience had narrowed to the point where efficiency mattered more than star power, speed mattered more than comfort, adaptability mattered more than medals. And once USA Basketball acknowledged that truth, it became clear the old blueprint wasn't just aging, it was actively being solved. Because in the modern international game, hesitation isn't punished eventually, it's punished immediately. And the system Team USA relied on for years was no longer fast enough to stay ahead.
Behind closed doors, far away from cameras and public opinion, the conversation shifted in a way it hadn't in years. This wasn't about talent evaluations or minute distributions. It was deeper than that. According to reports and growing speculation within basketball circles, Team USA's decision-makers were forced to ask a question no dominant program ever wants to face. What if the very players who built this legacy no longer fit the game that exists right now? That question isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. Because once you entertain it, there's no clean way out. It challenges loyalty. It challenges tradition. It even challenges the idea that greatness should be rewarded indefinitely. But ignoring the question was no longer an option. Close calls on the international stage had turned into warnings. The trends were too clear. Speed was winning, spacing was winning, and hesitation was being exposed. The hardest realization wasn't that younger players were getting better, it was that holding on to familiar roles was creating friction. Certain lineups required the game to slow down, certain systems demanded patience, and patience had become a liability. International teams weren't waiting for Team USA to execute, they were disrupting it before actions could even develop. Reports suggest that coaches and selectors began mapping scenarios rather than resumes. They asked who could function under constant pressure, who could make instinctive reads, who could bend defenses without needing the ball to stop. And in those conversations, something unsettling emerged. Some legendary skill sets, as brilliant as they were, depended on control in a game that no longer allowed it. That's the moment everything shifted. This wasn't about pushing anyone out, it was about realizing that protecting the past might cost the future. Once that truth settled in, sentiment stopped being an option. There was no dramatic declaration, no public acknowledgement of the internal struggle, just a quiet acceptance that dominance now required risk. And that acceptance opened the door for a completely different kind of player to redefine what Team USA actually needed next. Caitlin Clark didn't enter the equation as another name competing for a spot. She entered as a variable that changed how the entire equation worked. The moment her film was studied in the context of international play, it became clear this wasn't about points per game or highlight shots. What Team USA saw was a system hiding inside one player, a way of playing that forces defenses to make impossible choices possession after possession. Her range alone alters the geometry of the floor. Defenders can't sag, bigs can't hover, help defense arrives late, if it arrives at all. But the real danger isn't the shooting, it's what happens once teams overreact to it.
Passing windows that don't exist for most players appear for half a second, and that's all she needs. She doesn't wait for plays to develop, she accelerates them. She reads coverages before they're fully formed and punishes even momentary indecision. This is where the separation happens. Most elite guards operate within a system. Caitlin Clark becomes the system. The offense bends around her gravity, not because teammates defer to her, but because defenses are forced to. Traps open lanes, switches create mismatches, overplays turn into back cuts. The pace doesn't increase because she's rushing, it increases because defenders are constantly recovering. And that kind of influence is exactly what international teams struggle to game plan for. You can prepare for sets, you can scout tendencies, but you can't simulate a player who compresses decision-making time on every possession. When everything happens faster than your defensive rules allow, structure breaks down. That's modern chaos basketball, and it's devastating against disciplined teams who rely on precision. This is why she didn't replace individual players. She replaced the need for control. Team USA no longer had to slow games down to manage risk. With Clark initiating action, risk tilts in their favor. Missed shots don't kill momentum because the pressure never disappears. Defensive mistakes aren't punished eventually, they're punished immediately.
Once that became obvious, the direction was unavoidable. Keeping the old approach meant limiting what this new one could become, and that realization put everything else, reputation, comfort, familiarity, on the wrong side of the decision. This is where the conversation gets uncomfortable, and it's also where it gets misunderstood. The shifts inside Team USA weren't made because certain players suddenly stopped being great. That narrative is lazy. The truth is far more complicated. Some of the most respected veterans in the program are still elite at what they do. The problem is that what they do best no longer matches the conditions of the modern international game. Control used to be a weapon. Slowing the tempo, dictating pace, forcing defenses to react late, those skills built championships. But international basketball doesn't allow that luxury anymore. Defenses switch instantly. Help arrives from unexpected angles. Offenses don't get 2 or 3 beats to read the floor. They get 1. And if that window closes, the possession is already lost. Certain legendary skill sets thrive in structure. They excel when the game breathes, when execution matters more than chaos. But today's global competition thrives on speed and constant stress. Teams spread the floor, pull bigs away from the rim, and attack gaps before they fully exist. In that environment, even brilliance can struggle to bend the game consistently. This isn't decline, it's misalignment. It's the difference between being exceptional at a style that once ruled and being optimized for the version of basketball that exists now. International teams have adapted their rosters specifically to neutralize traditional advantages. Post dominance is crowded. Half-court orchestration gets hunted in transition. Anything predictable becomes a weakness. That's why these decisions hurt, because there's no dramatic collapse to point to, no obvious failure. Just a quiet realization that some strengths require conditions that no longer exist at the highest level. And when a program chooses evolution over comfort, those realities can't be ignored. Once Team USA committed to a faster, more reactive identity, they had no choice but to let go of pieces that anchored the previous one. Not because those players weren't great, but because greatness alone isn't enough when the game stops waiting for you. The reaction was immediate, and it was loud. The moment the news spread, the basketball world split straight down the middle. One side saw betrayal. They called it cold, unnecessary, even disrespectful. How do you remove players who carried the program through its most dominant years without so much as a public thank you? To many fans, it felt like history was being erased in real time. On the other side were people who had been quietly expecting this moment. They didn't celebrate the cuts, but they understood them. They saw the warning signs in recent international games. They noticed how close easy wins were becoming. To them, this wasn't cruelty, it was survival. A program choosing progress over nostalgia before nostalgia turned into a weakness. What made the backlash even heavier was the silence from inside the program. No emotional statements, no defensive explanations. That absence fueled speculation. It made the decision feel colder than it might have been, and it left fans to fill in the blanks themselves. Some saw it as arrogance, others saw it as quiet confidence. Fear started creeping into the conversation, even among supporters of the move. Because once you cut legends, there's no safety net. If the next generation stumbles, there's no one to hide behind. Every turnover, every loss, every close finish becomes evidence in a trial that will last for years. People aren't just watching games anymore. They're watching to see if this gamble survives scrutiny. Inside the fan base, the questions grew sharper. What if this transition phase lasts longer than expected? What if the chemistry doesn't gel? What if international teams expose weaknesses faster than Team USA can patch them? These aren't doubts about talent. They're doubts about timing, cohesion, and the price of rushing evolution. And that's what truly divided the audience. Not whether the future belongs to a new style, but whether cutting ties this decisively was necessary right now. Because progress always sounds logical in hindsight, but in the moment, it feels like standing on unstable ground, hoping the fall never comes. This is the risk nobody can talk their way around. If this vision works, it will be praised as bold and necessary. But if it fails, the fallout won't be subtle. Every loss will come with an asterisk. Every close game will reopen wounds that never had time to heal. The moment Team USA looks human on the international stage, the narrative will flip instantly. Because without the veterans, there's no buffer, no familiar scapegoats, no comforting explanations about experience gaps or chemistry issues. This group will be judged solely on results. When opponents make runs, cameras won't pan to the bench looking for leadership that once stood there. They'll zoom in on the new core and ask whether the bet was made too early.
International teams are already preparing for that possibility. They don't fear the names anymore. They study tendencies. They'll test depth. They'll pressure ball handling for 40 minutes. They'll force the new system to operate without momentum. And if cracks appear, they'll exploit them relentlessly. That's what modern competition looks like. There's no waiting period, no grace window. What makes this even more dangerous is the timing. Team USA isn't rebuilding in obscurity. They're evolving under a spotlight that magnifies every mistake. Every miscommunication becomes evidence. Every loss becomes a referendum on the cuts that started all of this. And fans who felt blindsided won't forget quickly. There's also the internal pressure. Young players don't just feel opportunity, they feel responsibility. They're carrying expectations once shared with legends, and that weight can either sharpen focus or slow everything down. Momentum matters, confidence matters, and nothing tests both faster than international adversity. If this transition stumbles, the conversation will turn harsh, not about systems or trends, but about whether Team USA abandoned stability too soon. And once that debate starts, it doesn't fade quietly. It lingers, it shapes selections, it rewrites legacies. That's the cost of choosing the future without a parachute. The hardest truth Team USA had to confront is one that dynasties rarely accept in time. Dominance isn't permanent, and it doesn't disappear loudly. It fades quietly while everyone tells you nothing is wrong. Wins still come, but they're tighter. Confidence remains, but the margin for error shrinks. And by the time panic sets in, the advantage is already gone. That's the moment USA basketball was determined to avoid. Modern international dominance isn't about overwhelming talent anymore. It's about constant pressure, adaptability, and eliminating predictability. Other countries no longer build teams hoping to survive. They build teams to expose habits. They prepare for pace, spacing, and decision-making speed. And if you can't operate at that tempo for an entire game, they don't need to be better. They just need to be ready. This is why comfort became the enemy. Familiar systems feel safe, but they also signal stagnation. International opponents aren't impressed by resumes. They're energized by the idea that the gap is finally close enough to attack. Every possession becomes a test. Every hesitation becomes a target. And once opponents sense vulnerability, they press harder, faster, and longer. Team USA's leadership understood something critical. Rebuilding after failure is infinitely harder than evolving before it. Choosing adaptation while still winning is messy, controversial, and emotionally costly. But it's also the only way to stay ahead in a landscape where everyone is studying you. Waiting for proof of decline would have meant waiting too long.
That's the uncomfortable reality of modern dominance. It requires cutting ties with what once worked in favor of what works now. It requires accepting short-term instability to protect long-term relevance. And it demands belief in a vision that won't be fully validated until years down the road. Team USA didn't make this move to shock people. They made it because standing still is the fastest way to fall behind. The old era thrived on certainty. The next one will survive on adaptability. And whether fans agree or not, that's the price of staying on top in a game that no longer waits for legends to catch up. This was the moment Team USA crossed a line they can never step back over. Cutting legends wasn't just a roster move, it was an admission that the past can't protect the future anymore. Once that door closed, nostalgia stopped being useful. Comfort stopped being safe. Everything became about what wins now, not what once did. The program didn't just choose a player, it chose a direction, and that direction comes with pressure that never lets up. Every international run will be judged through this lens. Every close game will reopen the debate. Every stumble will be framed as proof that the gamble went too far, too fast. That's the cost of acting early instead of waiting for failure to force your hand. But here's the reality Team USA accepted before anyone else did. Standing still was the real risk. The world isn't chasing American dominance anymore. It's studying it, dissecting it, and testing it relentlessly. And beating that requires more than talent. It requires evolution, even when evolution feels ruthless.
This new era won't be defined by names or medals. It will be defined by fit, speed, and adaptability. Caitlin Clark isn't carrying this alone, but she represents exactly why this shift happened. The game changed. Team USA finally chose to change with it. Whether this becomes the start of another dynasty or a cautionary chapter won't be decided overnight. It'll be decided possession by possession against opponents who no longer flinch. One thing is already certain, though. There's no going back. The future has already been chosen, and the rest of the basketball world is watching to see if the risk was worth it.